How's it going, guys? We're back again with another Master Duel deck profile. Today's deck, I have Dogmatika Ritual. So there is two versions to play of this deck. You can play a going first version or a going second version. I think both versions are still both pretty good. But the deck profile I have today is a going first version. I think generally going first is still better in Yu-Gi-Oh! So playing the going first version is probably better, even though you can still play going second cards. But for the going first version of this build, I'm focusing a lot more on hand traps. And another reason why I'm playing this and going first is because of another card that I put into this deck. To start things off, we have 3 copies of Duel and Lockbird. This was a tech option that I decided because around this time in the TCG, Duel is starting to get used a lot more. Next, we have 3 copies of Maxi. I think this is pretty much mandatory when it comes to Master Duel. Next, we have 3 copies of Nightmare Corruptor Ibli. So this is the reason why I'm playing it going first. Pretty much if you open this card or Signet Mining and you get Ibli, you can normal summon Ibli, link it off for a link 1. Typically it's going to be Almirage. But then you can put this card on your opponent's side of the board, and that actually protects the rest of your plays from stuff like Evenly Match. It protects you from Imperm. And also if your opponent's not playing a link deck, then they have to find a way to get rid of the Ibli first before they can even play. Next we have 3 Ash Blossom. Again, I think this is just a mandatory hand trap. We have 3 Ecclesia. This card actually pairs up with the Ibli pretty well because as soon as you perform your link summon, you can actually just special summon the Ecclesia from your hand and then search a card. 2 Fleur-de-Lis for a monster negate, also boosting up our Dogmatikas during the battle phase. 2 Maximus. This also partners up with Ibli because it gives you the link material in the graveyard that you need to special summon the Maximus. 1 White Relic of Dogmatika. So if you're not too familiar with this card, this is mostly for going second because this card can actually help you OTK. But it has the effect that when it's special summoned, you target 2 face-up monsters, and then you boost the attack of one by the attack of the other. This card also has 2 other effects, where level 8 or and higher Dogmatika monsters cannot be destroyed by battle. Also, if your opponent special summons a monster from the extra deck, you can look at their extra deck and then send 1 card from it to the graveyard. 1 White Knight of Dogmatika. This is the card that I mostly try to go into going first besides the boss monster. So this card has the effect that when your opponent activates that effect, you can look at your extra deck and your opponent's extra deck, send 1 card from each, and then this card gains attack based on half of the attack of both monsters sent. And then finally, the boss monster, 2 Alba Zoa. So this card provides protection for all your Dogmatika monsters. It makes them unaffected by activated effects by fusion, synchro, Xyz, and links. And then during your main phase, you can activate one of the effects that your opponent will choose. So your opponent will either, for every 2 cards in their extra deck, send 1 card from their hand or extra deck to the graveyard, or you have to return all fusion, synchro, Xyz, and link monsters they control to the deck. So going first, they're pretty much forced into using the first effect, and this could easily rip out like half of their extra deck turn 1. The tricky thing about this card is that you don't know what your opponent's playing going first. So you could be just filling up their graveyard with stuff that they need or stuff to give them more resources. But I think generally getting rid of half of their extra deck is actually like a pretty good resource to rip from. Also, typically you're going into like other plays as well to rip out even more cards. So first they have to rip out 7 cards from their extra deck, and then Maximus can rip out 2, and then during your opponent's turn you can rip out another 1, either with the White Knight of Dogmatika or the White Relic. And also if you have the continuous spell Dogmatika Matrix, you can rip out another 1. So altogether going first, there is potential to rip out 10 cards from your opponent's extra deck going first. We have 2 pre-prep, so this card can only search the Macabre ritual spell along with the White Knight or the White Relic, but it is another searcher to help you extend. 2 Signet Mining for the Ibli, 2 Nadir Servant to search any of your Dogmatika stuff while also filling up your graveyard with extra deck monsters. 2 Calamity. So this is probably my favorite ritual spell because it allows you to perform the ritual summon using a monster from your extra deck. And then 2 Macabre. I think this card is also mandatory just because if they do out one of your rituals and sends it to the graveyard, this card can actually get the monster back from the graveyard. Plus, you can also just banish fusion and synchro materials from your graveyard to perform the ritual summon. 3 Dogmatika Matrix. I think this card is insane for this deck because if your opponent has a monster on the board, which going first, when you give them the Ibli, they will. This card can search you 2 cards that you're looking for. First, it searches a Dogmatika ritual or a monster. and then you can search any Dogmatica card with the second search. This card has a second effect too, where if you control a ritual monster, you can send a monster from your extra deck or your opponent's extra deck to the graveyard. The thing to note about that is that it's not a once per turn, so if you have 2 of these on the field, you can use the second effect twice. We have 3 copies of Evenly Matched. This is for going second, and 1 Dogmatica Punishment. If you have what you need already, you can search this going first and then just set it as another interruption. For the extra deck, we have 2 Entus to pop cards, 1 Garura to draw a card, 2 of the Ash Dragon to get a search or special during the end phase. We're playing 1 Dust Dragon because we can send this to the graveyard, and then if your opponent special summons, you can banish it and summon the Fortis. 1 5-headed dragon to summon the Alba Zoa, 2 Herald. This card is not once per turn, so if you can send it multiple times to the graveyard, you can get multiple searches for a ritual spell or monster. 1 Omega, by sending it to the graveyard, you can shuffle itself and another card from either graveyard back into the deck or extra deck. 1 Aggregator, when this card is sent to the graveyard, it is a monster negate. And then 1 Secure Gardna, Almirage, and Lingaribo for our Nightmare Ibli. So I do think that this deck is very strong. It can go first, it can go second, it can break boards, it can stun your opponent. I would say that if you're interested in trying out this deck, there's also other options that you can try out in terms of card options. For example, I think Dogmatica Nation is actually a pretty decent card. It makes it so that neither player can target Dogmatica monsters you control with special summon monsters from the extra deck. It also gives your monsters the ability that after damage calculation, if your Dogmatica monster battled, your opponent's monster is destroyed. It also has a second effect where if this face-up card on the field zone is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can have each player send 1 monster from their extra deck to the graveyard. So just ripping out more resources from your opponent's extra deck while also protecting your Dogmaticas on the field. You could also probably play the other level 8 Dogmatica monster, because if a extra deck monster leaves the field or is sent to the graveyard, you can special this card from your hand and then target a Dogmatica card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. You could probably also try out the trap card. This is a ritual summon from deck. In terms of Dogmatica cards, I think the only other one that is probably worth playing is the Nexus, because since you're fueling up the graveyard so much, this card is actually fairly easy to summon. It has good stats, but it also has the effect that at the start of the damage step, if this card battles a special summon monster, destroy all your opponent's attack position monsters, then inflict 800 damage to your opponent for each fusion, synchro, Xyz, and link monster destroyed by this effect. So this card could potentially be a board wipe if in any case it's just a big monster that's very hard to get rid of for your opponent. Like I said, there are other ways to play this deck. You can play a going second version where you can just ditch probably like the Droll and Lockbird, the Nightmare Ibli, and then right there that's 6 additional going second cards that you can play. A card that's actually very perfect for this deck going second is Ultimate Slayer, because your opponent can't respond to this with monster effects. It's not once per turn, so it's not bad to draw more than 1 of these. But you get to send 1 monster from your extra deck to the graveyard, then target a monster your opponent controls with the same type, fusion, synchro, Xyz, pendulum, or link, and then shuffle it into the deck. So you get to put stuff in your graveyard while also getting rid of your opponent's board. But yeah, that's the deck. I do think that this is a very fun deck to play. I am a fan of the Dogmatica archetype. I think making a ritual version of this deck was something pretty interesting for this deck to do, and I think Alba Zoa alone adds so much power to this deck. But with all that out of the way, let's just get right into the games.